Hello, everyone, and welcome to Refresh. It's a time to connect, be inspired, learn something, and ultimately feel a bit better for this time we spend together. That's what Generation W is all about. Thanks to John Gordon for all his positivity last week. So much has stayed with me, and judging by the feedback and comments we've gotten from so many of you, seemed that a lot stuck with you as well. I remember he opened up by saying, it's okay to not be okay. Feel the feelings. Well, I gotta tell you, I am feeling so many feelings, and they come in waves, right? I kind of think, yeah, everything's okay, and then there's this burst of something. And I think we're all feeling a lot of feelings. This past week, what I'm hearing from a lot of friends is not so different than what my experience is. It's just how powerful these feelings are, the desire to make sense out of frustrations and, yes, anger and angst and confusion. You know, the questions, how do I make sense of what is going on around me and for me and with me and my family and my community? I guess that's all a perfect segue for our guests today. By popular demand, she is returning. Jamie Olken, licensed mental health professional, practices in New York City. So she's been on the leading front lines of our hardest hit city and populace. She joined us a few weeks back for a great conversation learning on how we can cope. And I'm so glad she's back again. And she's joined by our very new friend. Oh my God, what an amazing man, Dr. Richmond Wynn. He's the esteemed new director of the Counseling Center at the University of North Florida. Under the leadership of their new president, David Szymanski, who has really created and taken a renewed focus on the culture of students, their health and well-being, Dr. Wynn brings a wealth of research and experience to his emphasis, including his specific interest and research in the ways culturally diverse populations, particularly LGBTQ, negotiate their identities and manage their health. So today we are all into mental health. We are so glad that you are both here. So welcome, Jamie, Dr. Wynn.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Awesome. So let's start off. Did we lose? I hope Jamie's okay. She's going to be coming back in a second.
Change your mind.
Yes. Hi, Jamie.
Hello there. Sorry about that. Somebody was muting me.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's funny. Not funny, actually. All right, so listen, let's start off with, and I want to welcome everybody who's joining us, and they usually take a little while at the beginning. They come on. They're a big part of our conversation. But we talked about mental health, and Dr. Wynn, I'm going to start with you. We had a wonderful time a couple of days ago, and you talked about, when we speak about mental health, people think about crises, they think about mental illness, they think about trauma. Are we thinking about mental health in its entirety when we speak that way?
No, absolutely not. We need to think about mental health on a continuum. And certainly crises, mental health disorders and diagnoses are part of that continuum, but so is mental wellness. And if you think a long range, you go from wellness to some disruption perhaps, and again, over to diagnoses and mental illness. I like to put a lot of emphasis on wellness and prevention and early intervention. I also like to promote this notion of mental hygiene.
Right.
Yeah, because when we say hygiene, most of us think physical hygiene, and we know most of us will think about what we do on a regular basis, on a daily basis, and several times throughout the day to maintain our good physical health. And I like to think about mental health in the same way, mental hygiene. What do you do to maintain good mental health, functional mental health on a regular basis? And so I've thrown out some ideas of brushing your brain or flossing your heart. And those are ideas or thoughts or a way to frame this that hopefully help people understand that the importance of attending to your mental and emotional health on a regular basis, and not just waiting for a crisis to appear before you turn your attention to it.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And Jamie, some thoughts on that?
I like the analogy of kind of how we floss and brush and stroke. And so I think we could talk about this, because I mean, we were giggling about it, but we really do feel like, you know, what is it brushing your heart? And I think right now everybody's heart is very heavy. And so,
yeah, maybe we should, maybe we should talk a little bit about heavy hearts. What are you guys seeing in your practices? You're obviously on a college campus. We're hearing lots about our young people in particular, isolation, loneliness. I'm hearing from my friends who have kids who have concerns. What are you seeing? Jamie, I mean, are you in your practice?
So I think kids, in the first onset of COVID, when kids had to come home from school, or they had to be in a different place, or they were wanting to be in a different place, it was kind of okay in the beginning. They were with friends, or they were with family or extended family. So it was kind of like nice to have somebody else. And I think that this is the norm now. So I think kids are very lonely. I think people are talking about loneliness. I think kids are frightened. They're kind of not really sure how to handle not only BLM and COVID and being with your parents when you shouldn't be with your parents, but it's also kind of about what's happening with friends. It's hard to connect. It's hard to not see each other or touch each other.
Right.
So I think the loneliness is real. I think it's, and this is for kids, this is, community and getting together and gathering is the way that you can, that you express this. And they're not doing that. I mean, they are doing it, but they're not doing it as much as they would like to.
Right. Well, apparently they're doing it a lot here in Jacksonville Beach, Florida. We made the national news. I can't say they're all kids at the bars,
No.
but we have, it's really, you forget that COVID's still here with everything else that's going on. And now these bars have to close. But you're on a college campus that's preparing to welcome students back, Dr. Wynn?
Yeah, we just talked about this. I was in a staff meeting just an hour ago. And we've been operating remotely since March 3rd, the wonderful Friday, March the 13th. And so we've been doing telehealth through video conferencing and telephone. And I've been surprised at the number of students who have told their therapists that they don't want to do telehealth. They would prefer to do telephone. And many of them prefer to be seen in person. And what we were just talking about an hour ago was how some of our clients are anxiously awaiting the campus to open, and they do miss the social aspect of campus life. And even though it's going to be very different when we get back, it's been interesting to hear how many students are really waiting and desiring to get back. And I think that's what we're seeing, with some of the openings of some social events, that they're flocking out to these clubs and wherever is open, because they are missing that connection. I think the being isolated because of COVID, and then when our protests start happening, when this renewed focus for some of us has been a sustained focus on racism and what to do about that, how it's been impacting people, that has added a whole nother layer of isolation, of loneliness, of wanting to connect and have deeper connections, and to try to really understand each other's perspectives, try to lend support, and try to figure out next steps. Where do we go from here? So adults are dealing with that, and everything adults deal with, young people deal with as well.
And that's true. That's absolutely true, right? So let me just do this. Let me say hello to some of our friends, like Sue Levine and Lisa Morrow and Nikki Glover and Katie Armstrong, in addition to Kaylee Paget and Angel Crawford and Andrea Whiteman and Amy Ruth and Alana Olken. Oh my God, she's finally made it. Hi, David and Daniel. With Danielle, and we'll say more to people along the way. Lisa's always here. So we become like this community, this family, so we won't feel alone. And by and large, I think that happens. Here's a question, though, that's come right from the audience. We're going to get to the mental hygiene. We're going to come back to that because it is really powerful. So the question is, what should we do? Do we sit with the sadness and heaviness, or try to pull ourselves out of it? And you know what I mean? And this is an unpaid session for everyone to know, but come on, we're asking for the real deal here. What do we do? What do we do?
Well, I say yes to all those things, all of the above. And because I think part of being able to do something about any emotional state that you're in is to first acknowledge the emotional state that you're in, to realize that it's real, and to give yourself permission to feel those things. You know, no feeling is wrong. There's no such thing as a wrong feeling. You might be experiencing some emotions and some feelings that are uncomfortable or that maybe not as productive. They inhibit your productivity or your balance and your peace in life, and you want to do something about them. But first and foremost, acknowledge it exists and know that there's nothing wrong with the way you feel. It's a part of the human experience.
Right. Jamie, how about you?
Yeah, I just think that we have to respect our feelings right now. I think that we have to, you know, I think we just have to listen and not judge. I think we just have to learn of what is going on with all of us and what's going on with each other, and really kind of, you know, lead with listening and not with judging. And, you know, our feelings keep changing all the time. We're winging it. We have no idea what we're doing. And so it's going to change. And I think your guest, Gordon, Mr. Gordon, said, you're not going to know what it is. So when it comes up, recognize it, embrace it. It's okay.
Mm-hmm.
We also have a desire. We want to move with it and also through it, right? So there are times I feel this fog. Okay, I recognize the fog. I want to move through the fog as well, not denying what's there, but I want to, you know what I mean? And I think we'll talk maybe about this with mental hygiene, but people want to understand, recognize, talk, but also, I guess, taking action is, that's why we hear so many people, I got to do something.
Mm-hmm.
Jamie, I got to do something. Do we have to do something?
Well, I think when the protests started and we really are opening our conversations to, you know, to BLM and to really the injustices in police departments, in schools, and really the whole system that we live in, that I think people felt very much needed to do something today. I see everybody in your background.
Yes.
All these beautiful boys are walking by.
He wanted to do something. He definitely wanted to make a cameo.
And so I think that you know, people feel like if I don't do something right now, I'm not going to be able to be supportive, to be part of it. And I think what we need to communicate is this is forever, and this is something that we all have to commit to, in my opinion, forever. As a white person, forever. And I think that you have to first understand what you're doing, how you're doing, and what needs to where you can participate. There's so much to participate.
Right. Mm-hmm. And Dr. Wynn, I want to flip this over to you, because Jamie obviously is speaking from a white person's perspective. We've had a lot of discussions about you as a African-American person's perspective, which we definitely want to hear. I just want to forward this one question to finish up on kids, which is, somebody asked, do you have any ideas on how to check in with adult children? My mother didn't write this, by the way. Are not with you in person. So how do you get a sense of your adult children's mental health when they're not with you? Now, Dr. Wynn, you have people's, right, kids all the time away from home.
Sure.
Tell their parents to check in on their mental health.
Well, whatever methods or means they have of being in communication with them is the most simple way. We certainly can't step in and facilitate that unless there's permission to do so, or if there's a crisis or emergency type situation. So I think it's all a part of the nurturing the relationship that parents have with their adult children, and establishing the boundaries, or establishing what's norm, what's okay in terms of communication. Is it okay to reach out and ask for a parent to reach out unsolicited and to check in, and do their adult children feel comfortable and safe enough to reach out to them and say, hey, I'm not well right now, or I need help, or I need to talk. So it's really having a talk about the relationship that goes well beyond what we're experiencing now. And so if there are challenges or difficulties with having open dialogue between parents and adult children, and that's something that I think as a family, they would maybe want to spend some time examining how they communicate.
Right. All right, so I have to go back to this because Jamie brought it up. Before I do, we want to say hello to Pam Challey and Tony Hernandez. And you guys got this. I feel like I should be doing, Michelle said I should use, I feel like I should use this time to sort through photos and clean up. I get that. But then it's like, nah, I'll watch another cat video.
That might be good too.
Not productive. Anyway, Jamie said like she is speaking as a white woman in terms of looking at the work. There's definitely emotions that line up. We all have these uncertainties. We've talked a lot about your experience as an African-American man, not only in the world, but also in the mental health space.
Sure. Well, and so one of the things I like to discuss when talking about racism, structural, institutional racism, and how that impacts us is to talk about some of the research that's been done over the years, looking at how people, African-American people in particular in this country, who have been exposed and experienced racism either directly or vicariously by witnessing it happen to other people. And when we experience that over the long term, many endorse the symptoms of PTSD that is laid out in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders. Now, the DSM does not allow us to formally diagnose PTSD based on racism. That's another conversation. But when we see the symptoms, and the symptoms are being reported to us as coming from their experiences of racism, that's hard to deny, and it's our responsibility as therapists to address them. So some of those symptoms include feeling disconnected and lonely, second guessing yourself, this thing we call hypervigilance, where we're always on guard, wondering, when is this other shoe going to drop? And it's kind of like you're constantly watching your back. It's called increased survival mode, or wondering, is this person a safe person? I can tell you from my own personal experience, every time a police car comes near me, I have that second guess, and I'm wondering. And I haven't had any negative experiences with law enforcement, but I've seen it. We've all been witnessing in recent months, but this has been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years. And so some of the symptoms that I talked about, it's important for us to recognize, what we're experiencing. So the second guessing, feeling lonely, disconnected, the hypervigilance, constantly being on guard. And imagine constantly operating at a heightened sense of awareness. That is, in and of itself, is taxing. So that can lead to depression, anxiety, substance abuse, eating disorders. There's decreased trust. We're not sure who to trust. And so everybody becomes suspect. There's certainly people that we think look like the perpetrators and the promoters of racism. There's increased worry, feeling powerlessness. And then these experiences can trigger old traumatic experiences that we may have thought were completely resolved and we had moved on. And so we're wondering, like, why am I re-experiencing that thing from my past? Right. We tend to avoid situations that might re-trigger those old experiences. And then this existential questioning of why, how can people be so cruel? How can the world treat me this way, or treat people who look like me this way, and treat any human being this way? And so just feeling powerlessness, and all of that fits within the realm of traumatic stress, which is, how we diagnose PTSD. So I think truly understanding that all those things could be happening, and that also gives us permission to do something about it once we understand what's happening. But I think all of us need to acknowledge the traumatic nature of both experiencing racist acts and witnessing it. So watching this stuff on TV all the time, reading all the news, it is very, very.
Right. If you look at all of the violent images we're fed all the time. So listen, bear with me just for a second here. These traits of PTSD, we're talking about hypervigilance, what looking around your shoulder all the time, right? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? All of these triggers, in a sense, that's police work. I'm wondering out loud whether you have two populations right? Both sides. And I'm not saying even on a race basis, but obviously we have truly severe targeted racism here. Where you have all these populations who have PTSD who are interacting with each other and constantly, right? I mean, police are out in the streets feeling like they're targets all the time. This is not a political statement at all. I'm just saying, you put on a uniform and everybody's, and they're trained, now this goes into training, they're trained to be looking at everyone as well. It's just like, it's not a recipe for success, is it?
I would say no, and I would make a slight distinction in terms of the experience with, say, between police officers and again, African American people in particular. While police officers are trained in terms of surveillance and looking out for a potential threat with the intention of, hopefully with the intention of making environments safe, the hypervigilance that African American people are experiencing is rooted and based in fear that we are unsafe and that we are extremely vulnerable and at risk. And we don't have, generally speaking, we don't have the guns, the tasers, the handcuffs, and the law.
Absolutely, there's no institutions behind us that
Exactly.
I totally get that. I totally get that. Jamie, did you want to add something here?
No, I just think that it's listening to Richmond speak and kind of hearing what other African Americans are talking about. There was a picture of a little boy shooting baskets in his driveway, and a police car drove by, and you see him going behind the truck.
Exactly.
And I freaked out when I saw that, because I would never think of doing that. And this little boy was like scoring his 3-pointer and didn't even retrieve the ball fast enough to run behind a truck, and then went back and started shooting again. And I was like, that is hypervigilance that this little boy needs to not have. And that's our responsibility for this little boy to just shoot baskets.
Yeah, but that goes to the conversation that mostly Black parents have with their Black sons, mostly about how to be safe when you're having an interaction. Let me reference this question from David. As an African-American male, how do we promote the race conversation with white people around what they observe and how they can shape their worlds to the positive?
Have the conversation among, I said just the last part, a conversation among white people.
White people around what they observe. So what do white people see, and how white people can shape their worlds to the positive. So it sounds, David, like he's looking at how do we have honest conversations with white people around being an ally, doing a audit of their own behaviors and attitudes that they can then adjust, which is I think that's also about mental health. I think that when you feel injustice so deeply and you don't know how to change it, I think David's getting at that. I don't want to put words in his mouth.
Yeah, and absolutely. First, I would agree with you. All of this is mental health. And so I would say what I just said about Black people understanding what they're feeling is that white people need to understand this whole experience of traumatic stress and need to check biases. I mean, we all growing up in this country, we all have some bias, implicit bias that about ourselves and each other, actually. And so we all have that responsibility. And so I would certainly say looking within, and there's a lot of information in trainings even out in our community on implicit bias, and looking at just those deeply held beliefs that we grow up with, whether they were passed on to us from our environment, or we accumulated them or cured them along the way. And that is, I think, the first step, because part of what keeps racism alive and well is the promotion of stereotypes and misinformation about people. So that's important that David and others have clarity about what they believe. And that goes to another point I think that we had up on our graphic. Don't believe everything you think. Just because you think it doesn't make it true, doesn't make it real.
Yeah, tell me a little bit more about that.
That is awesome. Richmond, will you expand on that? We had this great conversation about this.
Yeah, and so we have, we develop a belief system, a value system, and I liken it to, carrying around a big sea bag. One of those bags that the sailors have, those big long green bags. And as we grow up, we get pictures and images of what it means to be good, what it means to be bad, what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, what it means to be, all these things. And so we put images in this bag. And so as we move through life, we encounter a situation that calls for being a man. And so we go, oh, I know, let me go dig in my bag and find that image. This is what I learned about, this is what it means to be a man. Well, that may have been what you learned, but it might not be accurate.
And it may not be you.
Say again?
And it may not be you.
Exactly, exactly. So we have to, part of mental hygiene and constantly attending to our mental health is examining all of those deeply held beliefs, these core beliefs that we have about ourselves, other people, and the world. And it's important to do a regular inventory. Think about it also like your computer. You do a software update. You get a little notice that says an update is ready, and you update your operating system so that you are using contemporary software. And so not examining your beliefs, not examining all those images in your bag is like working from a computer from back in 1982 or a computer from that just hasn't been updated yet.
I love that analogy. So here's what we're going to do. First of all, I want to welcome everybody to Refresh. It's that time we just take a little refreshment break to remind everybody that they're here with us. We're with Jamie Olken, mental health clinician on the front lines in New York City, and Dr. Richmond Wynn, now the newly named director of the Mental Health Counseling Center at the University of North Florida. We're talking about mental health. Jennifer Rosenthal has a fantastic question. And I'm gonna give you this question, and then we're gonna go to the graphic, and we're gonna check off and talk about all those the mental hygiene elements that you guys had put together. Okay, but this question I hear a lot. It's pretty close to my family and other people I know, and she wants to know about insights about having difficult conversations with family members and loved ones, showing you love them, but don't love or appreciate their racist beliefs. I will tell you, this comes up
all the time.
All the time. and here's the thing is we're all struggling with it so much. We don't know where to put. You said it. I mean, Richmond, you said it. You know, how can the world treat me this way? Or we're saying, how can the world treat anybody that way? And how can it be you, somebody I love?
Exactly. Yeah. So I think first of all, acknowledging that these beliefs and these comments are racist,
Are you serious?
in that framework, but also recognizing that we all have the freedom to think whatever we want to think. So I would not try to necessarily change what my family members think. I think being committed to your own truth and continuing to do your own mental hygiene work and emotional hygiene work, and being willing to share what you've learned, I think is so important. So going into a conversation with the intent of changing someone else might be disappointing and frustrating. But if you go into a dialogue with the intent of sharing your experience, look at what I learned today. I was at Refresh at noon today, and this is the insight I gained. I just wanted to share it with you. And by changing or refining what I believe about people, what I believe about Black people, what I believe about racism, what I believe about police, I fill in the blank. And what you're doing in that regard is you're not putting your family members in this hot spot that say, you're wrong, you have to change. That might be an appropriate conversation to have too at some point. But what might be most helpful, at least to open the dialogue, is to do more sharing of your own experience. How are you evolving? How are you changing? And you're sharing that out of love with your family members in hopes that they maybe see an opportunity in it for themselves.
I mean, the instinct is to run away from those family members. The instinct is to, really like cut them off, meaning like, I can't even listen to what you're saying. And that's exactly what we don't want to do, right? So we're trying to listen. We don't have to agree with them, but we just, if love is really what you're saying is important and you really want to have this relationship, then sharing the learned sharing the learned biases that we have, that we all have, being okay that we have it and a willingness to change, but we don't even know half of the biases that we have.
Yeah.
So when you hear a family member who is so obviously racist to you, you may be racist to somebody else who has a keen ear as well. And so my feeling is that I'm not going to run away anymore. I'm going to have those conversations, you know, no matter what it is, whether it's political, race, anything, because I think it is important to get to the next conversation.
Well, and I agree. And what I also would add to this is that it's important to set boundaries for yourself, because being constantly exposed to those kind of negative beliefs or racist beliefs and attitudes, no matter who it's coming from, can really be taxing. Like we said, it's taxing to the soul. And so I think even though you can commit to having a dialogue, and I think that's a good thing to do, it's also important as a part of your mental health to know your boundaries and what you're willing to expose yourself to. Because think about it, it's toxic. And so would you intentionally stay in a toxic substance, regardless of how you think it might be helpful, but it's toxic, and it's toxic to your experience and to your mind and your body, your soul. So we do have to have boundaries. And sometimes we have to say, I just can't do this right now.
Put the mask on your ears.
Put the mask back on your ears.
Let me just jump in here because Lisa had, Sherry, when you did that, oh my God, I just lost my person. I just lost my screen. Oh, here it is. Lisa says, how do I say, and I love that she asked this, by the way, because she obviously sees this as our community safe space. If I say to my Black friends, I'm sorry, I thought I understood, I thought I was an ally, but I now realize now that I really didn't get it until now. If I use those words and commit to bolder action, will that message be well received?
I really hope so, especially if it's really truly coming from a sincere place. I don't think sincere
for sure. Yes.
Yeah, and to be honest, I don't think white people need validation from Black people in terms of what they are doing for their own health and wellness and growth around their own biases. And I think it's nice in your communication and communion and community with people, with Black people, to have these open dialogues. And it can be reinforcing when she says something like that to a Black friend, and the Black friend says, oh, that's so helpful. That's great. But I would say to her, don't rely on getting reinforcement or needing reinforcement from Black people to continue doing the work with your own biases or your own understanding.
And if it comes from being very authentic and not guilty or not feeling, wronged, and you're really coming from a genuine place, you could say anything to somebody without the expectation, like you said, of getting something back.
And yet, what we're hearing, and I'm certainly hearing, that there is definitely stress on the Black Americans that comes with debating these issues.
Yes.
Right? And it's just truly feeling you're being heard or understood, as to how to balance that healthy conversation versus draining debate. We talk about that a lot.
What's the classic difference between dialogue and debate? Debate is where there's going to be an argument and arguing points, rather, and there's going to be a winner and a loser. In dialogue, the idea is that everyone goes into a conversation with the intention of being open, being vulnerable, and walking away transformed. Everybody. And there are no winners and losers. In fact, everybody's a winner if we all go into dialogue with the intention of being open, vulnerable, learning, seeking first to understand before we try to be understood ourselves. And this includes everybody. So I think framing this as dialogue and understanding dialogue versus debate can be helpful. And I would just underscore what Jamie just said about authenticity. If you are authentic, I think that comes across. People have asked me, white people in particular have asked me, or have said, I just don't know what to say. And so I'm afraid to say anything, so I'm quiet. And then I'm afraid that because I'm quiet, that I'm suspect of being against them or being racist. And my only response to that was saying that you don't know what you want to say, something you don't know what to say, coming from an authentic place, not out of fear, but coming from an authentic place might be the best thing to say. I just don't know what to say. I'm open I want to be supportive. I want to be an ally. I want to, do the work I need to do for myself. And I don't know what to say to you, my Black friend. That might be the right thing to say.
Yeah, so interesting. Let's take a look at our mental hygiene. I've been promising this, and let's take a look at our mental hygiene things, and we'll come back to Taylor's question about kids. All right, number one. So we're going back to Dr. Richmond's, Dr. Wynn, we call him Richmond.
Either is fine, whatever.
Going back to your concept that we need to practice hygienics. Oh my God, that's a word from high school. On our mental health as well as our physical health, right? So one, brush your heart.
Well, so it's all the stuff that we've been talking about, and it's looking at your intentions, looking at what you're looking at, your fear, your own emotional state, and looking a little deeper to see where that comes from, especially if you have fear of the other, if you have fear of people who don't look like you, or you get anxious around people who don't look like you or who are different from you. That's an opportunity to look more closely at what's in your heart. I mean, it's a combination of one and two, what's in your heart and what's in your head. They go together, actually. So brushing your heart is doing those things. It's addressing any unresolved issues you might have had in the past that are lingering, that feed into stereotypes, that lead to stereotypes about others. So you might have some more work to do, not so much about, in this case, Black people, but it may be brushing your heart, maybe dealing with your own traumatic past or your own history of difficulty and challenging relationships and trauma that can help you see clearer, that can help you see more accurately. And again, in tuning into your intentions. And I'll go on to say with number two, because I think they go together. What I mentioned earlier about the sea bag and the images as part of flossing your brain is checking in with yourself and asking, is what I'm thinking actually true? Do I have evidence to support what I keep telling myself? And even if I do, even if there is some bit of evidence around what I these beliefs I keep reinforcing, is it actually in my best interest to think this way? Is it helpful? Is it productive? Feeds into number three, don't believe everything you think. Just because you think it doesn't mean it's true. So it's important as a part of our mental hygiene is that we talk to ourselves, we examine what we think, because what we think is connected to what we feel and how we act.
I think also we're not always going to know, it's okay not to really know everything. That I think that if we're feeling angst and we're not sleeping, or we're just feeling uncomfortable, then we may have to sit with that a little bit.
Yes.
And if we're not judging it and we're kind of opening up the path, we may be able to understand what you're talking about. So when we were talking about brushing your heart, it's kind of like, go there, go with what your heart, what do you want from that? Mm-hmm. Right? If you want to not be open to feeling love or feeling loved, then you're going to be closed. But if you're tired of that and you really want to do open up, you got to practice it. You got to take the risks. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I also, one thing that you said, Richmond, which I think is really important is because you're African American doesn't mean that you're going to answer every question. That's your responsibility. And no. I was thinking about, you're in a room with 30 other administrators and you're the only African American, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, you're gonna hate these meetings for a lot of reasons, but for just everyone looking to Richmond. So I think that's an important thing. Just because you're African American doesn't mean that you're gonna be answering my questions.
Right. We're not a monolithic group. I don't represent all African Americans. It's not possible. And nor do I have all the answers to how to address racism and fix it and move on from it, or heal from it, rather. I have my experience, and I have the experience of many people I've been in community with over the years, and I still read about other people's experiences through research or other kinds of literature. So, I can certainly reference some of those things, but it is challenging. And this has been most of my life. I've been in many spaces where I was the only person of color, only a Black person in a room full of white people, all the way back. I can go back to second grade and talk about that, and all the way up to this morning, in a meetings that I was in this morning. And so, and I think that, most groups that I'm in are conscious of that, and I can feel the tension a little. And when we're talking, I'm glad that we're having conversations about this in all of these groups, and I can feel the anxiety around, asking, well, Richmond, what do you think? And when I'm the only African American in the room, and that's okay. But what I don't want to do is position myself as the expert on the Black experience, because that I am not. Right. We all have different experiences that are layered and intersecting different experiences and identities. And so I think it's important to keep that in mind. The other thing that I think is important about that is for us to examine why in 2020 would I be the only African American in a professional setting? Why is that? And what can we do about that? We need to examine our policies of diversity and inclusion and hiring and promotions, and we should be approaching work in particular, and in our social groups, but especially in work, we should be approaching that with the intention of creating diverse workspace at every level, especially in those decision-making jobs. So the people who make decisions about any organization or institution, we should go in with the intention that this has to be a diverse space. This group has to be diverse, and it has to be representative of our world.
Without a doubt, right? Without a doubt. And all research points to the fact that diverse decision-making groups make better decisions for the entities in which they serve. And so there's that kind of prolonged and proven validation of what you're saying. We have a question from a young high school student, Taylor, and she said, lots of students are sharing their thoughts about racism. How do I, as a Black kid, share my stories and uncomfortable talks with people in school?
Hey, Taylor, do you feel comfortable at school?
No, well, Taylor, I can't speak for you, because her follow-up is, and how do I deal with the toxic environment that I have to deal with as well? So I think it's probably challenging. And again, I don't want to speak exactly to Taylor's situation. She'll either text me or not, so I can see more. But I'm sure there's many students like Taylor who are experiencing having those similar experiences.
So Jamie, you were asking, do you feel comfortable? I was thinking safe space as well, and safe relationships. And we may not know. I'm wondering if there was a connection between Taylor and these friends. I think they were described as friends. Then I'm assuming that there is some degree of safety if they were considered friends prior to the conversation of racism being so present in our world right now. And so I would perhaps maybe even talk about that. Going back to what I said about the conversation between parents and adult children, maybe the first part of the conversation is talking about having conversations, is not so much jumping in right into racism, but let's talk about, sort of the norms of how we communicate. I really want to share my experience around racism and how it's impacting me. But first, I want to establish some norms and how this conversation can take place. I want to share my truth without being judged, and I'm open to hearing your truth without being judged. Maybe we can do some basic communication practices that therapists teach, especially in couples counseling, and that is listening to someone, not speaking, and hopefully not already trying to determine what your reply is going to be, but then having to repeat back in their own words, what did you just hear me say? That's right, Jamie, very typical intervention that we use with groups and in couples. We establish that we're going to talk about the process first before we get into the content, the details. And the process is, you really want to hear the other person. And so you don't speak and you listen. and then repeat back what the person has said to you. And and that's just a simple exercise to say, can I really listen? Can I listen deeply? So that would, my first suggestion would be to talk about the process of talking, of communicating before you're getting into the content.
Well, and Taylor says kids really need this conversation. I can share with all of you that I do sit on the KHA board, which is Kids Hope Alliance, which is about servicing our at Hope kids in our city. And today's conversation was a lot about the need to bring kids together to have these conversations, and adults as well. I would like to remind everybody, if you didn't know, or let you know, that we're having a WOW conversation today. These are WOW for our teen girls. Ruth and Elizabeth have led extraordinary programming and content and creating safe spaces for our teen girls. It's today at 2 o'clock. We'll be extending the conversation on race, race and coping for teen girls. They can either DM on Instagram or email info@genwnow.com for the login. So anybody who's listening who knows teen girls or attached to teen girls, come join us. It has been really a wonderful, extraordinary experience. We only know that by what the girls say, and that's what they're telling us. So if you want to be in a safe space and have some good conversations, then please join us at 2 o'clock. I think the last thing we talked about taking the mask off your ears. And I think what you just talked about in terms of mental health clinician strategy was about going into that conversation and understanding before you want to be understood. That's, I mean, would that be fair to say where you are on that?
Oh, absolutely. I think that was Jamie's comment about taking your mask off your ears and listening. So certainly that strategy is one way to take the mask off your ears, is to really truly listen before talking and trying to understand and repeating back what someone has said, because you may not get it right. We often listen through our own lens, right? And so it's maybe hard to hear, and it might have to be repeated over and over and over again until we get it right. Something that I just heard you say, I just wanted to highlight it, and maybe it's a distraction from the real point, but you said that you were on the board of Kids Hope Alliance, and you said there was at Hope Kids.
That's what they're called.
I love that. That's part of that. See, that to me, that's part of flossing your brain, is reframing from a more positive stance. Because how many times have we heard of at-risk kids? And what does that, number one, what does that mean? And number two, what impact does that have on the person who's been labeled at risk? At hope, there's hope. I absolutely love that. So that's another way to floss your brain, is to begin to frame things. Reframe things, right? There you go. Reframe things in a more positive and productive way.
Okay, so here's another one. Black people are charged with being okay and pushing through. Be strong as very young children. How do you healthily reprogram to allow honest feeling and emotion?
I think Taylor's question was really what's brought us to this answer right now. And I think if Taylor is the astronaut, is Taylor the astronaut?
He is our superstar astronaut, correct.
So I know Taylor.
That's our superstar human, let me say that.
That's question, that is awesome that Taylor asked that question. This kid is a rock star. And I think, when you have a kid like this who has so much to offer and so much to say, and she doesn't feel safe, or this kid talks in front of 900 people. I mean, she's incredible. And so this is a very basic need. It's very basic. She has to feel safe. She needs a buddy with her, whoever that buddy is. And people that are coming in have to be willing to take off the mask. Sometimes we put the mask on, but for this case, we have to take the mask off. And, there's so much room for Taylor that we don't want her to be held back.
Fabulous. This is going to turn into the Taylor show, because I know Taylor and her mom too. Hey, Taylor. Say hello to your mom, please. And you're right. She's absolutely fabulous. And I appreciate, Taylor, you being you first and foremost, and being willing to go into the go into the unknown. And this is unknown territory. So apropos for someone who aspires to be an astronaut. And so going into these conversations are like going into space. It is really the unknown in some ways, because you don't really know who's safe and if it's going to be okay, or if you're going to be emotionally accosted or even physically accosted in some cases, even from people who you thought were safe. So I think, going back to the suggestions of setting some norms and tuning in, and really surveying the scene too, to see, is this really the place, the setting, or the people where this conversation can be the most productive, or is it somewhere else that I might be more fruitful to have this conversation?
And if it's not safe, don't stay there.
Mm-hmm.
Easier said than done, though, Jane.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
It's easy for us to say that, but I think it's easier said than done. That's part of the issue, and is we all feel, and maybe we keep ourselves in spaces we shouldn't be, but then we don't know what the options are, don't know what all the impact of going someplace else is. I think there's a lot around that makes it difficult. But I think that's definitely part of a conversation in terms of when you say, in terms of your mental hygiene, right? Here's my mental hygiene. Here's how I'm feeling about the space I'm in, and what are the things I should be checking to see whether it works or not.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? Oh my goodness. Okay. So we talked a lot about people really resonated around your talk about PTSD.
Mm.
They were like, yes, 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 yes.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How do we identify that?
Well, being familiar with the symptoms first and foremost, and again, tuning in. I think it's important for us to be intentional about spending time with ourselves. And some people call it meditation, some people call it prayer, some people call it quiet time, reflection time. And we talk to ourselves all the time. I know people usually joke about that, like, oh, you're talking to yourself, something's wrong with you, but we do it all the time. And we couldn't operate if we didn't. This is a pretty sophisticated piece of machinery that we all have here. And there is constant communication between the brain, the heart, our then the rest of our bodies. And so it's not that we are not talking to ourselves. Most times we're not paying attention to the conversation we're having with ourselves. So I would say getting familiar with those symptoms that I laid out, and this information is out there if you want the definitions, or I've seen some. I actually have a thing right here now where it's sort of broken down into more layman's terms. But so being familiar with those symptoms, and in that space when you're tuning in meditation or reflection, checking in with yourself and doing your own inventory, if you will, your own assessment about, do I have these experiences? Am I triggered by watching these images, and is it bringing up old trauma experiences for me? Am I hypervigilant? Am I constantly aware or in survival mode all the time? Am I waiting, for the other shoe to drop constantly? And so checking in with yourself on those things. And I have to say, going to talk to a therapist. And that's what we're trained to do, is to help people see themselves more clearly and more deeply. And so that was a good time. Even if you're not experiencing any distress, now is a good time. And usually most of us would say that's probably the best time to start working with a therapist, is when you're not distressed. And certainly when you are distressed and having difficulty, therapists are here to help. There's more accessibility with a lot of therapists doing telehealth these days. And so I think having someone to help you do this part of the work of looking at yourself more clearly, more deeply, is a good thing. And it's a resource. Therapy is a resource. So it's like using a tool to help you manage your health and well-being.
Right. So let me just ask you this. I'm going to ask you both. Stacy said, I would love to know your concluding little wrap-up statements for us. But before that, Lisa just asked this question I thought was important, because especially those of us who are women, although I can't say that doesn't happen for men, probably does. But how do we help others when we feel like we're at the end of our own personal, right, reps? Like, our reservoirs are so low, and yet we are there, supposed to be there. how do we fuel the tank?
I'm not sure that you can help other people while your reservoir is empty. I think you have to just accept that right now it's okay not to be okay. And you start rejuvenating and you start empowering yourself and you start feeling better. And then you can step out and help. But I think you got to start with yourself. And so there's times that you just kind of, if you're at your end, Stace, then kind of build yourself back up, give yourself some time. It's okay. And I think you have to really be kind to yourself. Just be okay with that.
Right. Okay. Well, that was Lisa. So she thanks you. So how about some closing words of advice in this difficult time, Jamie? You're always having closing words of advice.
I think what I said to Stacy is important, but just understand to report things, don't judge things, and to take the mask on, put the mask on when you have to, and take it off so that you can listen. And keep coming back for conversations. It may not go right the first 10 times, but just keep coming back.
And I would add to what you were saying earlier about, basically we were talking about self-care when I think it was Lisa talking about being depleted and trying and expected to help, that I thought I heard that I'm supposed to help. And so part of that is checking the expectations that you put on yourself, and building or enhancing whatever your self-care regimen is. Part of this whole mental hygiene, we also call it self-care, is setting boundaries and taking space and taking time to refresh and renew. That is a critical part. Taking time out, disconnecting from the news, for me, I like to disconnect from people and conversations and go hang out with the trees. And so that is a very critical part of this whole process, and we call it self-care, mental hygiene, taking care of yourself, renewing. It's like you wouldn't keep driving your car on empty, it wouldn't work. And you have to plan to go to the gas station, plan to go to plug your car in if you have an electric car. We have to do that. We have to plan and incorporate intentionally taking care of ourselves so that we don't get so depleted. But when we find ourselves depleted, taking time out, disconnecting, and you're not responsible for taking care of anybody else. And I realize that may be challenging, especially for parents. So maybe I should qualify that and say there are times where you do have to, you do have that responsibility, parents, pets, so on and so forth. But even that comes with boundaries. And so figuring that part out for yourself.
Awesome. So let me do this. Can you believe it? We're at the end of this hour.
Oh, no.
I'm going to feel like at the end of my hour with my therapist, I need more time. I need more time. Come on, wait. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much. Great questions, even better answers. We will all move along better from this, spending time with you and with each other. So thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Dr. Wynn. Next week, we have another inspirational and very informative conversation with an amazing woman who many know. If you don't, you really should. We'll be welcoming Lakeisha Burton, a mom, a wife, an officer of the law, to talk about Behind the Badge. Timely discussions by a very inspirational woman who has accomplished so much when many didn't expect her to accomplish anything at all, but she knew different, and she inspires all of us who are in her sphere. So I want to thank everybody for coming once again. Of course, to the entire Generation W team, Sherry, our producer, she works hard, as does Stacy and Jamie and Kasha, Christina, Tara, Elizabeth, and Ruth. Everyone works hard and contributes to this opportunity that we have together every week. Thank you for joining us, and please do keep spreading the word that there is a place to refresh in the world, Wednesdays at noon. For those of you who would like a Zoom link or know anybody who wants to join and particularly like to join through Zoom, you can do that through info@genwnow.com. And I also want to remind everyone that today at 2 o'clock, if you know a girl, today is something tangible you can do. You can connect her to the Gen Wow Circle and Club and the amazing Ruth and Elizabeth and our team that are doing such great work with teen girls. Today is an essential conversation. So please, again, info@genwnow.com to those girls. And by all means, stay in touch. And remember, together we are powerful. Together we are not alone. And together we are better. Which is why Dr. Wynn today said so many things. I'm looking at my page's notes, but I'm going to leave you with this one. He said, if you need to be refreshed, take time out and go hang with the trees. I'll leave you with that. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next week.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you, Jamie.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody.